So this is how to support a friend who has dementia or who is a caregiver. And although the video, if you're seeing my video, says Jan Robson, I in fact am Lori Kelly, provincial coordinator, one of 3 provincial coordinators for our Programs and Services Department. Just want to give you a bit of an idea of what we'll be covering tonight. We want to do kind of a 50,000-foot overview, a basic understanding of dementia and how it affects someone. Learn how to better communicate with a person living with dementia. And then from that, get suggestions on how to support a person living with dementia, as well as some supporters, as well as some suggestions on how to support a caregiver. And thank you, Maria Lynn. I see your test. Thank you very much. So this is a fairly lofty goal for the time we have, so I will try and keep on time. My assumption about you who are attending the workshop is that you're someone who's in the network of a person living with dementia or in the network of a caregiver of someone living with dementia. You might be a friend, you might be a more distant relative, you might be a co-worker, you might be in the same faith community, but you're not necessarily someone who is making the day-to-day decisions and involved with the day-to-day activities of a person with dementia, but you're a little more removed than that. Not that someone living with dementia or a caregiver are not completely welcome. Of course you are. It's just that the focus of this is for people who are a little bit more removed. So I think it's important to start with understanding who we are as the Alzheimer Society, and I don't think you can get to know us better than through our vision and our mission. So our vision is a world without Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, and that world begins with a more dementia-friendly society where people affected by dementia are acknowledged, supported, and included. And how do we get there? Through our mission. And our mission is that we ensure people affected by dementia are not alone, by educating and mobilizing a broader community of care around them, thus this workshop, and you are now part of that broader community of care, and by supporting valuable research into the disease and people living with it. So as we get started, one of the first places to start is what do we mean by dementia? And often people use the word dementia as though it is a diagnosis. Oh, John has dementia. And in fact, for the sake of brevity, that is definitely how I will be referring to it tonight in this workshop. But the fact is that dementia is actually an umbrella term. It's a broad medical term used to describe a whole variety of symptoms, including obviously memory loss comes to mind, difficulty thinking, there can be problems with communication, behavior changes, a whole variety of symptoms. Dementia is progressive, which means that the symptoms will gradually get worse. And because it's caused by a degenerative disease in the brain, as more brain cells become damaged and die, it will get worse over time. There's another way to kind of think about it, and that's that in a more linear fashion, if we think of that there are a number of progressive degenerative diseases, Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, mixed dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia. There's a whole variety of dementias. And those diseases, they cause damage to the brain cells and to the neural pathways. And the damage in the brain is what results in the symptoms that we see. And those symptoms taken together we call dementia. And so, again, that's memory loss, confusion, and disorientation, can be impaired judgment, communication problems, a whole variety of symptoms. Another way to kind of think about the word dementia and its relationship to the diseases is to think about a basket of fruit. Fruit, like dementia, is an umbrella term. So there are apples and oranges and bananas and grapes. If you have a banana, you have a type of fruit. But if you have a type of fruit, it isn't necessarily a banana. And in that same way, if you have vascular dementia, you have dementia. But if you have a dementia, it isn't necessarily Lewy body, for example. So that's often can be a helpful way to think about it. Those of you who are on the phone alone will see this if you ask me for the slides, but there's just most of the presentation you don't need to actually see, but this is a slide that is helpful to see. On the left, this is a slice down through the brain, straight from straight on. And so on the left, we're looking at a healthy brain, and you can see there's very little space. It's quite densely packed. And on the right is a brain of someone with very advanced Alzheimer's. So broadly speaking, and I'm sure that you know, different parts of the brain are responsible for different aspects of who we are and what we do. So for example, the frontal lobe up here in the front behind our forehead, it's involved with processing movement, problem solving, concentrating, personality and mood, amongst other things. The temporal lobes here beside our temples and running back above our ears and deep into the brain, the temporal lobes are quite large. They're involved in memory, in sensory input, in language, emotion and comprehension. A big part, or I shouldn't say it's a big part, but an important component, though quite small, an important component of the temporal lobe is what's called the hippocampus, deep inside the brain. And it's a part that is absolutely key involved with memory, both in terms of short-term memory and in terms of translating that short-term memory into long-term memories. It's essentially what writes down the long-term memories. So if you can see the slide, you can see the brain on the right is one, the advanced Alzheimer's, is a brain that has a lot of shrinkage or atrophy. There are large spaces in the brain where brain cells have died, and there are gaps in the brain. And if you think of our brains as a telecommunications network, you can see that in this brain there are power lines down all over the place. And the reason, although this is hard to look at and hard to think about, it's very important for those of us who are interacting with someone who is living with dementia, because we need to understand that what they are experiencing are profound changes in their brains, and those changes impact the way in which they interact with us. So language areas, in those temporal lobe areas, language areas are very affected by most dementias, certainly by Alzheimer's disease. And as the disease progresses, the areas of the brain involved with language become significantly atrophied. One of the most important things to note is that area of the brain, the hippocampus, that's involved with memory. And it is profoundly affected by Alzheimer's disease and by other dementias as well. And so it's important to think of it, at least I think of it, as I said, like something that writes down the memories into long-term memory. It's a good way to think about it because when someone with dementia expresses to you that they don't remember what happened yesterday, that they don't recall seeing you, it doesn't matter how many times you prompt them, they are not going to remember it because their brain didn't write it down. And for all intents and purposes, that event didn't happen. So that's an important thing to understand. If you're talking to a friend who is living with dementia and you say to them, do you want to go for coffee? Very simple request. It seems like it should be just a snappy answer. Depending on what's going on with their brain in that moment, where they are in the progression of the disease, the time of day, whatever is going on for them, you may experience that they take a long time to respond. We sometimes assume that they can't hear, and we speak louder and say it again. Well, again, thinking of it as neural pathways, it's just that the message maybe has been rerouted to a much longer path, and it's just taking longer for the person to process the information. So we'll talk about the fact that you do need to be a bit more patient when you are allowing someone with dementia just to have a little bit more time to process. So when we're talking about people living with dementia, this may seem really self-evident, but they need to feel valued. And that may seem very simplistic, but the fact is people living with dementia are devalued at almost every step. As they begin to have difficulty in processing things that are being said to them, as they begin to have difficulty in thinking and putting their thoughts in order, the society in which we live tends to have little time for that, and so they may find that they are asked for their opinion much less frequently, that they are told instead of asked. Often people become afraid, and because they don't quite understand what's happening with the person living with dementia, and so they withdraw. And that also ends up leaving the person feeling very devalued. People don't want to spend time with them. They may be concerned about how the disease will affect them and their families. Of course, any one of us would worry if we are living with a disease that may make it necessary for people around us to help us more. And inevitably, folks are concerned about that. They still need companionship, of course, just like every one of us. But they may also be embarrassed by their symptoms, and those two things can go together. They may have moments where it's, oh, I've known this person for 30 years and I cannot remember their name. How embarrassing. Many of us have had those experiences in the moment of forgetting someone's name, but you often have the feeling that it's on the tip of your tongue. You know that the name will come back to you. That's not necessarily the case for people living with dementia. That name could be gone, and it's horribly embarrassing. Or they may look at a clock and in the moment not be able to tell time and be mortified. Oh, people must think I'm so stupid, they may feel. And so that can have a huge impact on how they're interacting with people. So understanding can go a long, long way. So how do you support someone living with dementia? There's we broadly often talk about dementia in 3 big stages: early stage, middle stage, late stage. And of course there's not clear dividing boundaries, but generally in the early stages the symptoms are quite mild. Where you can hugely support someone is just to continue to be a friend, just to be there. You may start to experience things like your friend telling the same story a number of different times. And again, our instinctive reaction is often to we let our body language show that we are, okay, we've heard this story, thank you very much. But if you can be the friend who hears the story 10 times in an hour and every time is able to react as though you were hearing that story for the first time, what a gift you are giving your friend or your family member. Because losing memory is something that many people with dementia are keenly aware of and really mortified by. And if you can simply, in that moment, not take that time to remind them that they've forgotten, that is being a real friend. You want to continue to do activities with them. The activities may change a bit, but it's important that you continue as much as possible. So for example, maybe you're president of the Horticultural Society and your friend is vice president. And because of their dementia, they may find they can no longer keep up their vice presidential duties. So they're not able to hold that role, but they can still come to the meetings and participate in the meetings. And as much as you can facilitate that they continue, the better that is for them. Being someone to talk to, someone who understands a little bit about their disease can be helpful, but honestly, just talking about normal everyday things, not necessarily about the disease, but about the upcoming Horticultural Society Bazaar, or about the golf game on Thursday, or anything that you guys normally would talk about. Normalizing is a hugely important thing. As the disease progresses in the middle stage, again, continuing the friendship, just being a stable presence in their life is very, very important. You may find that visits need to get shorter, but it's still very, very important to be there. You may need to adapt some activities more. Perhaps the person can no longer be involved with landscaping, but perhaps they can still pull weeds and would very much like to do that. Or be able to help choose whether this plant goes in that spot, or whether it's this plant or that plant. So adapting activities. They may require a little bit of help now and again with some tasks, but often just very task specific. If you can give them a bit of help and then it just kind of like, oh, okay, and then that step you've helped them with and they can go on. Patience is a big one for as supporting someone living with dementia. If you are not a particularly patient person, then consider this a real opportunity for you to practice those skills. Being patient is a huge gift. In the late stages of dementia, where very often there have been quite profound changes, again, the visits may have to get even shorter, and there may not be much conversation. It may again be just the pure gift of your presence, just sitting with them, perhaps holding their hand, perhaps gently touching on the arm, maybe just watching the birds at the bird feeder. But again, allowing yourself unhurried time with the person and just being in the moment. Often the best way that you can support someone living with dementia is to reach out, to be there. As I mentioned, it isn't unusual that people start to withdraw. But if you can remember that this person who's been your friend or that you have known for however long you have known them is still your friend, is still your aunt, is still your cousin, and that you will continue to enjoy them, that can help to not give in to the stigma and the fear. Often when someone is experiencing difficulties, health difficulties, it's very natural as human beings that we have trouble knowing what to do. We're just not sure. And so sometimes we fall back on doing nothing. And just reaching out is a huge thing. Arrange a time to visit. Your friends may experience changes in the way in which their day works. So it could be that you often got together in the evening, but they may be tired and going to bed very early. And so arrange a time with them to visit. And when you do, come prepared to listen. Ask the person, how can I support you? How would you like for me to be a friend for you? And that may feel like a very awkward conversation to have, but it can often be a really amazing conversation starter. Just an acknowledgement that there have been changes, that you and your friend are both aware of them, and that you want to support them in the way that it really works best for them. Communication is key, as you'll see as we go along, and so learning about dementia and how these diseases can affect the way in which you communicate is a critical part of support. So well done you for participating in this webinar. Don't take difficulties personally and adapt to the person because they can't adapt to you. Again, these two go together. It can be very difficult, I know from personal experience, to restrain from defending yourself when you go to visit as a very regular visitor and the person living with dementia says, "Oh, you haven't been to see me in forever." Especially if you have been a very faithful, regular visitor, it is hard not to say, "Well, yes, I just saw you whenever." But if you can bring yourself to just take a breath and calmly respond with something like, "Yes, it feels like forever for me too. I've missed you and I'm really, really glad to see you." That can often just allow you to just gloss over the accusatory part and respond to the feeling underneath their statement, which is that they're feeling alone and they're feeling they're lonely and it feels like a long time. And certainly we can all relate to that part of it. It's important to remember that you are the one with the intact brain, and remembering the changes that we talked about earlier, clearly especially in that moment, they may not be able to adapt. And one of the best gifts that you can offer someone living with dementia is just to slow down. All you can do, or one of the best things you can offer, is your unrushed presence. So if you catch yourself speaking quickly, and you can probably tell that's often something I struggle with, slow down. If you find yourself doing things quickly, trying to hurry the person along, slow down. It's a little like when you're driving somewhere and there's construction on every route. I don't know where in the province you are all from, but down here in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver in the summer, it can feel as though every single road that you take is under construction. And there is absolutely no way to get where you are planning to go in the time that you expect to get there. There is only one thing to do, and that's to take a breath and slow down and drive according to the way that the construction allows you to drive. That's a really good analogy for dealing with someone living with dementia. Just slow down, understand that the person that you are interacting with has those kinds of detours. Unfortunately, it's not construction. They're more like bridges have gone out and are not going to be repaired. But there are communication detours in the brain, and things just take a little longer. So, what do? It can be things like making sure that you continue to go out and play golf or play billiards or darts or whatever it is that have been part of your regular experiences. The person may have difficulty, particularly as the disease progresses, they may have difficulty remembering what's happened an hour ago, a week ago, but they may have very clear memories of 10, 15, 30 years ago. And certainly if your relationship goes back that far, this can be a wonderful opportunity to reminisce and laugh about, oh, that time when you had to run across the field where the bull was because you shouldn't have been in that field in the first place, or some of the football games you attended or you played, or have a look through some old photo albums and remember some of the old stories. And if your relationship doesn't go back that far, looking through old photo albums can be a great way to hear stories that you didn't know. You can take the person shopping or drive them to church. Perhaps they've reached a point where driving is no longer safe for them, or they simply don't feel comfortable driving, particularly at night. You may want to go for a walk together. That can be a very relaxing time to spend together. Go out for coffee, particularly if it's been a regular thing. Take them to one of their medical appointments. It can be very valuable to support a friend or a family member by going with them to see the doctor. It also can be something, if they have a regular caregiver in their lives, it can be something that gives the caregiver a bit of a break, so you can be supporting both of them. Watch a favorite movie together. Go to a senior center together. Really, it is about doing all of the normal things that you've done. I love this photo, and in fact, many of the photos in this workshop were taken by this gentleman. His name is Mario Gregoro, and Mario is a man who was diagnosed with dementia a few years ago, and who since then has become an avid walker and photographer, and he offered us a number of his photos. He's a good example of ways that you can support a friend living with dementia. You can go walking with them and support a variety of interests. Maybe it gives you an opportunity to take up something you never really had the time to do before. Maybe you also wanted to learn photography, and it gives you a good excuse. So there's a slide with a woman holding up a cat, and she has a thought bubble above her head in which there is a face of a puppy, a face of a kitten, a face, and a question mark. So when you look at this slide, the idea is to think, what kinds of things might she be wondering? And it's knowing that there are all of the changes in the brain. She could be holding up this thing thinking, what is this? She could be thinking, is this a dog or is this a cat? Or she could be trying to remember, is this Fluffy or is it Billy? Whatever it is, it's because of those changes in her brain. Oops. Next section, I'm going to play 3 short stories for you. The whole thing will only take 1 minute, so I ask you to be patient and also to listen carefully, because at the end of it, I'm going to ask you some questions about the stories. So just listen, and then in a minute, I'll come back and ask some questions.
I've never heard of the She didn't sound like Roddy. Story reading about World Bulldog. My mom's were all beautiful after the war. Doesn't take care of her. She's like all without that world. She's walking up the wall because I got in my French. It's not her tap down to Maddie. But I was like that man. You hold that the way. One time ago, as you and me, I don't recognize the man as your baby. And I proceeded to find out what kind of was. Wonderful happiness. 2 steps to the house and her family taking the right path. Shut up and her unwanted. I found out the girl was married and walked such and I like my girl to make sorry and we had my great noble, but I either had fell below.
All right. So, I'm sure that felt like a lot longer than a minute, but it was, I promise you, just 60 seconds. So, think about what that experience was like for you. This really exemplifies what it may be like for someone who is living with dementia, who has lost the ability to differentiate different sounds, to differentiate between background noises, between conversation, all sorts of sounds, and sounds may just come at them as a wash. Did you feel frustrated? Were you trying? Did you try to pick out the different stories? There were, in fact, 3 different distinct stories being told. Or did you just kind of turn it all off and withdraw and just wait for the minute to be up? How would you have felt if that had continued for much longer? Would it have made you angry? Would you have withdrawn, hung up, or left the webinar? Would it have made you feel mad? Or just think about it, and then think about how sometimes people living with dementia react to things. So they may speak sharply or be more angry than you remember them being. They may be more withdrawn or more passive. This exercise gives you just a small inkling of the challenges that can be faced by people living with dementia. And hopefully that experience, along with that discussion and pictures of the brain that we looked at will help you to make some sense of perhaps some of the communication difficulties you've been experiencing. So I want to just talk a little bit about communication strategies. And certainly these are not going to be applicable right from the beginning, and nor in all situations. Certainly you don't want to sit down with your friend who has just been diagnosed with very early stage dementia and begin speaking very deliberately. If your friend is anything like me, that will just irritate them. But it's important to remember that dementias are mostly degenerative diseases, and they will progress over time, and there will be increasing communication challenges. And so the strategies are valuable for you to be aware of as early as possible, and just keep them in mind and keep them in your hip pocket. So give one message at a time. Break it down into small steps. If you're doing something kind of complicated, think of it as one thought equals one sentence. So if you are visiting a friend who is perhaps in the middle stages of the disease and you're helping make lunch, you don't want to say to them, hey, it's lunchtime, why don't you turn off the TV, go wash your hands and come into the table. That seems like a very easy flow for those of us with an intact brain, but is a number of separate discrete steps. So being prepared to break it down and to not overwhelm them with too many choices. You may find that people begin to just say, I don't know, when you say, what do you want to do? And so it can be helpful to offer much more restricted choices. Would you like to go for a walk, or would you like to go to the coffee shop? Just two choices. Show as you talk. Sometimes the person may have lost a particular word, either for good or even just in the moment. And so demonstrating what you're saying can be helpful. Avoid open-ended questions. How are you feeling today? That can be very challenging. Or what would you like for breakfast? Or what do you want when we go out for dinner? What would you like to order? Instead, would you like to order a hamburger? That kind of thing. And allow sufficient time for the person to answer. It's often said, for truly listening, we need to listen, for hearing and listening, we need to listen with our ears, with our eyes, and with our minds and hearts. And that just means to pay attention, to watch someone's body language, be aware of your own body language, and make sure that what you're expressing is congruent. I often remember a friend of mine's young son who was in grade 1 and who was having a conversation with his teacher, who fairly clearly, whatever was going on for her, she wasn't particularly happy, but she was trying to tell him that she was. And so she said to him something about that she was having a good day or she was happy, and he looked at her and said, why don't you tell your face? I've often thought of that because people living with dementia become very we're all very good at reading body language, whether we acknowledge it or not. And people living with dementia begin to rely even more on their understanding of body language. So we want to just talk a little bit about communication strategies. So as I said, you're not going to need all of these right from the beginning. Set the stage. That means pay attention to what's going on around you. If the sun is coming through directly into their eyes, shift so that they are not looking directly into the light. Make sure they've got their hearing aids and that the TV is turned off, all that kind of thing. Get their attention. Make sure that you're not talking to them from behind. They may not recognize that you, in fact, are speaking to them. One of the toughest things is to avoid arguing. That is something, I mean, maybe I'm alone in this, but I certainly found that I have such an instinctive, no, that's not true, or the example I used where someone says, you haven't visited in forever. We instinctively, it seems, want to say, well, no, I was just here on Tuesday. But either you're going to end up in a lose-lose situation because you are speaking and arguing from two completely different realities, or you're going to make the person who is living with dementia feel badly because they have forgotten. So, like that example, so much better if you can step into their reality and say, yes, it feels like forever for me. The other thing is to flat out ask if they want your help. If they're struggling to find a word or to finish a sentence, they may just need a little more time. And it's respectful to say, would you like me, do you want some help here? And they will, you know your friend or your family member, and they will probably tell you. When we're looking at supporting a caregiver, which is what we're going to finish up in the last 10 minutes here, it's interesting because in lots of ways it is very similar. Caregivers, it's important to note that caring for someone who is living with dementia can be an all-consuming thing. There's a book out there that's kind of considered almost the Bible for caregiving. It's called The 36-Hour Day. And it's an excellent title because it really does encapsulate what many caregivers feel like. So keeping that in mind, they may need assistance but be very reluctant to ask. They may experience stress that affects their health. In fact, caregivers of someone living with dementia are very, very much at an increased risk of developing an illness themselves, a stress-related illness, and may end up in the hospital, in fact, because of it. They need someone who can listen but not judge. Whatever decisions they are making about their own lives and about supporting their person with dementia, they are doing the very best that they can. And so if you have a friend who is supporting his wife at home and his wife is becoming an increasing challenge to him, and you think to yourself, oh, John, come on, you cannot keep this up. You've got to put Mary in residential care. Don't say that to him, and don't indicate that with your body language. He likely already knows. What he really needs is just a supportive ear. They may be embarrassed by their family's symptoms, either embarrass themselves or on behalf of their person living with dementia. And so they may pull away from family and friends and isolate themselves. So how do you support the person? You may need to be a bit more direct than you normally would be. If you ask, how can I help? You may very well hear, oh, I'm fine. But if you look and pay attention, you may notice things that have slipped around the house, for example. Maybe there's laundry that hasn't been folded that normally would be. Maybe there's not a lot of groceries in the cupboard or in the fridge. Maybe you're noticing that the lawn hasn't been mowed for a long time. Offer to do something on a regular basis that you can commit to. It's those regular things can be really helpful. And just knowing that you're coming can be a bit of a lift for a caregiver. Obviously, some of the things will depend on your relationship. Offering to do someone's laundry is not something you're going to offer your neighbor. But I still remember an exhausted caregiver saying to me, I hate that I have to figure out how to look after the plumbing when the toilet broke, and that I have to remember to take my car in. That was always John's role. I've never forgotten her, and that had a profound impact on me because it really struck me how much, gender role or not, we tend in partnerships to develop things that one person regularly looks after. And when your partner has a progressive degenerative brain disease, over time, all of the things that they used to look after fall back on the caregiver. And so any way that you can offer a regular helping hand, if you're particularly good at fixing up things, that's great. Bring over a casserole. Allow them time to take a break from caregiving. That's a really important one. There's many things that they just don't have time to do, and so if you can take the person or sit with the person living with dementia, that may be one of the best ways to support the caregiver. One of the things, like, offer to be the information finder, particularly as the disease progresses and the needs of the person living with dementia increase and the needs of the caregiver increase. It can be overwhelming for them to know where to reach out to. So offer to look for some of that information. Call the Alzheimer Society. I'm going to end with a slide that has our dementia helpline phone number. It's also on our website. Excellent, excellent first place to touch base. If they're needing information about home support, offer to connect with the health authority for them. So there's a variety of ways that you can help. One of the things we have, and it's one of the documents that I will make available, or if you're on the phone and are not able to see the slides and you want me to email you these things as well, just let me know. This particular one is, it's the Asking for Help worksheet. And you may actually help them by sitting down and helping them fill it in. What are some things that they need help with, and who can they ask? As I've mentioned a couple of times, people living with dementia and their caregivers can often end up being in kind of a bubble because people have fallen away. And if you can pierce that bubble, even just once in a while, it can be a tremendous lifeline to people on the dementia journey. It's such a huge gift. And I know from listening to caregivers and people living with dementia that it is a gift that is hugely appreciated. So I have to say thank you very much for attending this workshop and trying to learn more about how to support someone. You are definitely being a good friend. So I'm going to bring the web links and the files back, and but just to talk a little bit about the Alzheimer Society. Sorry, I'm just resizing this so it doesn't get in the way of the files. First Link Dementia Support is the Alzheimer's suite of support: education, proactive phone call outreach, support groups, learn from home, so things like this webinar. We have support. We have tele-support groups as well. A whole variety of things, including the, skipped a slide, including things like our newsletters and the web link. One of them is to our newsletters and updates page, and I encourage you to check that information out. And as I said, our First Link Dementia Helpline, which is 1-800-936-6033. That's Monday to Friday, 9 to 4. It's just an excellent first step as you are looking for information. They have a variety of information. They can connect you to local resources, a whole variety of things. So excellent, excellent first stop. And that's all the information that I have for you for tonight.